Right, good morning everyone. Thank you David for inviting me and Laura and the team for inviting me here today. I am James Daniel, Director of Precision Grazing. Precision Grazing is a business that was set up almost 2 years ago, following some time I spent in New Zealand with a few interesting people there. A farmer's son originally and still am, with interest in agriculture, and probably with an interest or a key interest in a term I call personal productivity. So it almost relates back to the farm R scenario where underutilised labour and farm businesses which in essence aren't actually profitable, and that's a real concern, especially when we look that the average farm business in Cornwall receives £16,000 worth of subsidy each year, and that subsidy is the difference between profitability and loss making. But it doesn't need to be the case. Being in Cornwall, we're gifted with fantastic opportunities, and actually being in the UK, we have great opportunities to increase production from livestock, and the methods to achieve that are fairly simple. However, what we have in the industry is quite a big knowledge gap and a skills gap, and so the business Precision Grazing was set up to try and cater for those shortfalls, and in doing so, we've so far proved to be very successful. So we'll have a brief overview. The opportunities I see within Cornwall is our climate and our location, and saying that's common to the southwest and actually common to the UK. We're fantastic at growing grass. Our frustratingly reliable rainfall, even in summer, puts us in a position which is perhaps enviable of most other places. Not almost great for tanning, but really good for grass production. And we've got to say a mixture of landscape with a huge amount of biodiversity which we can support if we're practicing our farming, or our farming model is being construed and managed in the right way. The creation of the business is in essence fairly timely. Here we have the two previous leaders of DEFRA, Andrea Ledson speaking at the Oxford Farming Conference of last year, and Michael Gove this year. And their message really has been the same now. So we're moving away from a government which was focused on environmental schemes for their own sake, and actually one that's recognising the need to become an exporter of food, but to do it in a way that doesn't hinder or doesn't negatively affect the environment. But it's really the essence on production and productivity that's new, should we say, to the agenda, whereas before there was more focus on just looking after everything, and low output was a accepted consequence. The issue we have with low output was that the farmer wasn't profitable. And there's a good saying, it's hard to be green when you're in the red. If the farm's not making any money, it doesn't afford or can't afford to look after the environment in which it's operating. So there needs to be a need to do both. We need businesses that are profitable, an industry which is profitable for the good of the community, but however one that's enhancing its natural capital. And so can we design models and methods which allow us to do both? Against the government agenda, there's a growing awareness of food and food quality, which has always been a unique issue. We're blessed with cheap food. However, it's interesting to note the content of that food has been declining. So 1940 to 1991, the trace element content, or the mineral content in the veg and the meat that we're eating, is reduced, which is reasonably curious. Isn't quite interesting as well when we compare that with the spending of the NHS per head, so per capita, what they're spending on individuals. So as a nation, we're having more money spent on us, we're effectively unhealthier, more disease, and there's some evidence which supports the fact that because the food we're eating is lower in nutritional content, although it's cheap, we can eat more of it, we're eating more of stuff which actually isn't as good for us, and leading to a rise in health issues. So again, can the farming industry is in essence the source of these issues, and also perhaps the salvation. So, and where is the salvation originating from? It's from the soil. It's the content of that soil, and which leads to the content of the plants, which leads to the content of the vegetables directly, or the content of the meat via the animal grazing and consuming that the pasture. So that everything is very much tied up, and that mineral content for the animal alone closely relates to health benefits. and the use of vaccines and their natural resilience to disease, and also to plants, and that links to pesticide usage, and the uses of pesticides links back to soil health. And as a farming industry, for many people, we're in a very much a vicious circle. We've got a soil which is somewhat devoid of the nutrients that used to be there 70 years ago, and leading to high uses of pesticides, and therefore a reduction in soil health. And it's kind of hard to break that cycle. There needs to be a clear cut-off point, and that takes confidence and management, and that's probably where our business is coming in. So we're looking at production methods for grazing livestock, leads to a sustainable increase in business productivity, whilst enhancing natural capital. So by being sustainable, in essence, we need a model that is as good today or tomorrow as it will be in 50 years' time. And in that way, we keep this thing moving, and we do well by the community and by the farm as well. Perhaps an interesting thing to note within agriculture, within livestock systems, there's very much a focus within farming, as there is perhaps within other industries that very much focused on one aspect. So it's interesting to note within farming that, of production, so of what that farm's producing, 90% of that is down to management. You're really down to the capabilities of that individual or the individuals in that business. And only 10% is actually down to genetics. So within the agricultural environments, if we look at where the funding is in terms of marketing, there's a lot of marketing being put forward by genetic companies as the solution to farm productivity. Farms underperforming, it's probably a change of breed that's the solution. And actually, it's the management that's the first thing to change. Within that management, most of it's down to feed quality, feed quantity, and provision of that at the right time. And within that feed, there is the nutritional aspect, in terms of minerals, trace elements, and the rest is health, weather, and other matters, so terrain, topography, other factors which actually the farmer can't control, but a good manager can influence and adapt to. So management's pretty important, and within the industry we'd see perhaps a big skills gap. Individuals having the ability to, or perhaps not say ability, but haven't been upskilled, haven't been provided with the knowledge to make full benefit. So where the business comes from is it looks at the energy available on farms. So in essence, every farm has access to land. The amount of land it has access to is its limiting factor. It's the same as you run a factory. You only produce as much as you have space to have facility, have machinery or capacity to produce. So the farmer's land is the first limiting factor. Most of the farm's energy actually comes from the sun, and at the moment we're not taxed or charged for it, which is fantastic. So how much of that sun's light or energy the farm captures directly relates to their production potential, their productivity, and also to their profitability. So understanding of their potential is the first. We need some monitoring, reporting of what's going on farm, some monitoring of what they're growing and of the animals, and we'll look at some of these things as we go through. Most of these technologies are now in the marketplace, or being introduced sort of this year or in the previous year, so the area is growing quite quickly. So farm energy, we've done a sort of in the last 80 years a great amount of research in terms of what a lactating ewe needs to rear 2 lambs, the physical energy she needs, the megajoules, the calories. And if we know what her demand is and we know what the farm can produce, then we can say, well, okay, so sustainably the farm could support this number of stock and they could achieve this output. And so for a business starting the journey for the first time, it's making sure that their stocking rate is appropriate for the land they have access to, bearing in mind the other constraints on the system. So there's some good programs available to do that, being New Zealand based. But what we need to do is, this isn't very farmer friendly, so we need a method of translating that energy model into day-to-day advice in terms of we wake up this morning and we have the stock that we're in charge of, what do we need to do? And a lot of grazing systems, a lot of systems that are using pasture or green crops involve moving animals on a fairly regular basis around the farm, thus allowing more recovery time for the plants, deeper rooting depths. And so there's software available which helps the farmers plan, and that's where the business is coming in to take that management overview but communicate with the client via phone, because as we found out earlier, most farmers are using their mobile to access the internet, and there's more millennials coming through which are receptive of that technology. Data is key in any management system, and it's the more information the manager has, the more likely he's able to make the correct decision. So remote pasture monitoring, because as we said, the farm is driven by how much energy it can produce. Being able to identify where that energy is located and maximising or optimising the use of it, i.e. grazing the grass in this case when it's at the right stage, is good both for the plant and for the soil and for the animal and production as well. So a company in New Zealand partnered with guys in Australia, small part of the South Island, commercially available as of their summer, so as of this year. Not available here yet, but there's been work done locally and indeed nationally across the UK to pick up on this sort of thing. So monitor the farm by satellite. It allows a better resolution and allows the data to be shared by someone else who's not the farmer. At the moment it's done in paddock, and there's a labour cost and time to it as well. When we know where the quality is and where the energy is located, rather than physically going and moving the animals through a series of paddocks, having a series of paddocks requires infrastructure, and although the return on infrastructure, in terms of grazing infrastructure, and that's fencing and water systems, is rather good. The return on capital infrastructure is around 50 to 100%, so far better than those machinery assets we heard about earlier. There's still a cost, and it's not terribly flexible, so virtual fencing, whereby the animal wears a collar and is held in a virtual paddock, can be a real benefit. And that's, again, commercially available or soon to market, and it will link everything together. So the management will be could be done remotely, taking the animals to where the quality pasture is, and removing that element of uncertainty. And so as a business, we help provide some of that clarity in terms of taking an overview of the person's existing farm, providing at the moment infrastructure to allow them to utilise that land more productively, whilst being in response to the environment. So within our systems, we've almost eliminated the use of artificial fertilisers, which is proving a real benefit. However, production in terms of kilos of live weight being removed from the operation is increased by 50 to 100%. So we are producing more with less, which was always the aim, but it requires careful management and some infrastructure, which could soon be replaced by virtual infrastructure, providing the water facility is available. And of course, the question of how sustainable any livestock production system is very much in question, and so we're incredibly grateful that we've been able to be supported by Cornwall's Agri-tech funding. So this year, starting on the 1st of March in theory, and weather permitting, we'll work with Rothamsted to run a 2-year project looking at the net output in terms of the net environmental cost per kilo of product, per kilo of meat, running dairy beef animals under 2 methods of grazing, 2 styles of management, to verify that is it the number of animals per hectare which is of damage to the environment, or really is it the grazing management that has the greater consequence. So we have a 2-year project with a PhD student or member on that, hosted at Rothamsted site in Norwich, which has been enabled by the Agri-tech fund, and what we hope to achieve out of that is to deliver a service to verify the service we already have, but put in place some key principles to extend that model, to replicate that model, and also to inform government policy in terms of how they act with numbers going forwards, and what advice they're offering to farmers, and how policy is leading people in different directions in terms of stocking rate and production systems. Well, thank you all very much.